Well, this is General ASE Practice Test 4. And what I've got here is some more general questions for you. And so let me see if I can move on with the first one here and just get on with our business. Question 1. A vehicle has a P0300 with a pending P0171. What's the most likely cause? At least 2 ignition coil failures, a clogged filter or a failing fuel pump, cam position sensor sending incorrect timing, or valve cover gasket leaking on spark plugs. Question 2. What do you notice about these O2 sensor traces? A. They will not maintain stoichiometry. Bank 2 sensor O2 is far too lazy. Bank 1 catalyst is beginning to fail. Or bank 1 sensor 2 amplitude is perfect. Question 3. Diagnosing a steady skip on a distributor-equipped engine, disconnecting wire number 4 causes the engine to speed up. Do you replace all 4 spark plugs? Do you perform a valve adjustment? Do you perform a compression test? Or is there tracking in the distributor cap? V6 with variable valve timing has normal oil volume and pressure with a new oil control valve, but still sets these 2 codes that you see in the image of P0014 and P0017. The timing chain stretch test comes in at 4 degrees. Is it a faulty or skewed cam shaft position sensor, worn variable valve timing phaser lock pin, caused by extended or stretched timing chain? Is it a collapsed lifter on bank 1 exhaust cam? Question 5. A hybrid has a POA80 replace battery pack code with uneven cell voltages under load. Battery cooling fan runs normally and individual cell balancing has been attempted. What's the best next step? Do you replace the high voltage battery pack? Do you do a full capacity test on the modules? Do you change the battery control module, or do you check bus bar connections? Question 6. On a harsh upshift concern, live stream indicates the transmission skips from 2nd to 4th gear every time. The driver can feather the throttle just right and make it shift smoothly. Do you replace the turbine speed sensor? Do you replace the valve body harness? Do you do a full transmission fluid exchange, or do you reset transmission adaptive tables? Question 7. Engine starts normally when cold, but starts hard after a hot start. Never stalls while driving and runs normally. Is it a crank position sensor that fails when hot? A fuel pressure regulator problem? A failing PCM power relay? Or possible harness chafing? Question 8. Refrigerant enters the condenser as A low pressure liquid, B, a low pressure vapor, C, a high pressure liquid, or D, a high pressure vapor. Question 9. A customer had the tires rotated on their Honda Accord and came back complaining about tire noise. Did they have a bad bearing they didn't notice before? Was it too long between tire rotations? Is the rear tire pressure not adjusted? Or are some lugs too tight or too loose? Question 10. An alternator has been replaced 3 times on a 2001 Explorer, but the charging system doesn't work. There is good 12-volt power at the large terminal. With the key on, the cluster looks like this. Pay close attention to that cluster and see what you see. Do you check the fuses, replace the battery, check the grounds, or check the regulator? Now here we dive into the answers. Question 1. This is going to be a clogged filter or a failing pump. It'll make it misfire on various different cylinders, and you get your P0171 coming, which means it's in a lean condition now and again. And that's going to cause random intermittent misfires. A P0300 basically means that it's seeing misfires, but it can't pinpoint them on one cylinder. It's basically just seeing them all over the place. It's going to be something that's common to all of the cylinders typically when you see a P0300. You know, those are kind of annoying, the PO300, because you elect for it to give you a PO305 or something like that, so you go right to it. But in the early days of OBD2, sometimes I would see it misflag the cylinder that was misfiring. You know, like when you had coil pack ignition, it would flag one cylinder when it was the companion cylinder that was actually misfiring. And boy, that'll lead you down Robin Hood's trail. What do you notice about these O2 traces? The bank 1 catalyst is beginning to fail. If you've got a good healthy catalyst, you're supposed to have, you know, a lazy downstream sensor. And if you go back and look at that previous, I should have actually put it back on here, you'll notice that the downstream sensor for the number 1, for catalyst number 1, is far too active. And if you compare it to the one on cylinder number 2, on catalyst number 2, you'll find out that, you'll see the difference there. Diagnosing a steady skip on a distributor-equipped engine. Those are students' hands, by the way. Except for my hand is right there. That particular problem is tracking in the distributor cap. Now, I will say that back before Chrysler came out with distributor cap that was those brown caps that were made out of different stuff than the old phenolic caps or whatever they were made out of back in the early days. So, distributor caps were shiny black, and they really didn't work all that well, and they tended to carbon track. The crazy thing about that was, I used to, you used to hear all these stuff about people say, well, if you take a pencil and draw a line in the distributor cap between the coil terminal and one of the plugs, you'll make a automatic carbon track. Well, that's not exactly true. When I started trying to plant bugs whenever I became an instructor, I had fixed, thousands of cars, probably 5,000 cars a year for a long time. And I've found a lot of problems and fixed a lot of problems. But when I tried to plant problems, I had all kinds of issues. And what I mean by that was, there was a 91 S10 that we had. It was a trainer vehicle. And so to prepare for class that day, I took the distributor cap off and I sprayed water in it. Put it back on. Truck started and ran just fine. I couldn't believe it. All those times I had pulled the cap off and seen moisture in there, causing it to kick back and skip and cut up and all that. And what happens is, if you like you wash the engine or something, that water steams up into the cap. I don't know why that makes a difference, but just spraying water in the cap, it just still started and ran great. It's not a guarantee that spraying water in the cap is going to make it run bad. Something else I did was I had this 97 Oldsmobile. It was a trainer vehicle that had been donated by GM. And I took it was a 3.8, I took all of the spark plugs out and bent the gap shut on them. And I screwed them back in. And it started and ran. It didn't run good, but it started and ran. Of course, I can still use it because it didn't run good. But it astonished me how bad that thing wanted to run. Now, if you want to make one skip for certain every time, you bend the gap shut, or you just dip the plug in motor oil and screw it back in there, and you'll get a skip on that cylinder. I found that out. One time I crossed the spark plug wires on a Mercury Sable. They had coil pack ignition. It was a trainer vehicle because I was going to use that. And as soon as I spun it over, it kicked back really hard and busted the starter, and the starter was hanging by the wires. That was bad news. But anyway, the point is, planting bugs is not as easy as you think, particularly on drivability stuff, unless you jimmy a wire going to a sensor or something like that. But I was talking about ignition stuff, A V6 where variable valve timing has normal oil volume, that's going to be a worn variable valve timing phaser lock pin. That phaser lock pin's right there. It's supposed to stay in place so that timing doesn't change when you're starting the vehicle. When you're starting the vehicle, there's a lot more pressure, and as far as trying to turn the valves and all. But after the oil pressure kicks up, it'll pull that lock pin back and let it start adjusting the cam time. And then it uses the cam sensor and, has a feedback mechanism and all that. But the timing chain stretch is usually got to be to 6 to 8 degrees before a stretch code triggers on most engines. Of course, they're not all exactly the same, and nothing's impossible. But this is something is whenever you're talking timing chain stuff. It's just interesting to me how a lot of the times, just horsing around whenever I'm looking at something like my grandson was driving this GM little 4-cylinder SUV with I forgot what they call that thing. Anyway, what the point is, he was driving it and it wouldn't start. All of a sudden, my son's called, hey, this thing won't start, and all. So just horsing around, I got on Automotive Insights or one of the Facebook pages, and I says, what do you think about this? Not starting. And I told them what kind of vehicle it was. Well, the timing chain. Everybody started hollering timing chain because they love to holler timing chain. What they do is they give you the worst possible news, and then they they laugh about it and they go on. Well, it turned out that all we needed to get that SUV started was a set of spark plugs. He pulled the plugs out, and I said, that's all right. Let's go ahead and put a set of plugs in there. Put the plugs in there and fired up. There was nothing wrong with a timing chain on that thing. If you do the most expensive thing first, you're going to burn somebody, either yourself or the customer one. So it's always best to start simple and work your way up. Like, you don't replace the head gasket for an overheating problem until you've made sure the thermostat's not bad, this kind of thing. A hybrid has a PO80. You're going to do a full capacity test on the modules, and that's something that requires some special doing. Now that bus bar, I would have thought if I was just looking at this on a test and I didn't create this question, I would think bus bar connections, because those bus bar connections, that long bus bar that goes across all these 8-volt batteries, is a Prius battery pack. Those things will basically get all chalked up, kind of like a regular battery terminal. And something else you got to be careful about: if you ever unbolt this and try to charge up one of these 8-volt battery packs, it will swell up, and you will never get this put back together again. So you got to keep these things bolted together. But what they do, one of the things that the people that rebuild battery packs and stuff charge to check the batteries, they got a bunch of different ways they check them. But they charge they put the battery pack on charge with the special equipment, and then they measure the temperature of each battery to see if any of them is getting too hot. And there's all kinds of other ways to do this too, I can't go into the whole thing there. But uneven voltage indicates one or more modules have lost their ability to hold charge. And you could, a lot of the times these battery rebuilders will do that. Believe it or not, you can buy these batteries on Amazon now. For like a Prius and stuff, and they don't cost about $1,100, something like that. And they're not that hard to change, if you're in the hand with a wrench. There was this guy that called me one time. Well, his wife called me, and because I had gone to Craig Van Battenberg's Up Your Voltage School, and then he put me online as a registered hybrid technician with him, and and so and I kept that classification by retaking the test every year for a while. But anyway, she called because she found me online down there at the college and said, can you, we've got a bad engine on this Prius that we've got, and we need we bought another engine for $325 online, and it's here, and we just need somebody to put it in because all the shops are telling us it's going to be $2,500 to replace the engine. And I said, well, what does your husband do for a living? She says, he works for the power company. And I said, has he ever worked on cars much before? She says, yeah, he's changed out, water pumps and stuff like that and all that. And I said, well, tell him to pay attention to what he's doing and put that motor in there, because he'll be able to do it. This is not rocket science. And so this was like on a Thursday, and he called me the following Monday, and he says, I followed your advice and I put that engine in that Prius, and it was the easiest job I've ever seen. He said, I did it in a single day. And he says, I don't know why the shops were all wanting to charge $2,500 for what only took me about 6 hours to do. He was a guy in his 60s. You know, of course, I told him, I said, you know that little plug back there on the battery pack that you pull out to kill the, you know, high voltage? He goes, oh yeah, I know about that. And I said, well, pull that out and, you know, go ahead and just pay attention to what you're doing when you take it apart and put it back together the same way. And he made it happen, you know, and it's saved him a ton of money. Question 6, on a harsh upshift concern, this is reset adaptive table. This is real world stuff. I saw this on an SUV. One of my former students that had graduated sent me his cousin, and because her little Hyundai SUV was just doing a hard shift to jerk a crick in your neck, and I got in the passenger seat with the scan tool, and we drove it together, and I said, well, if she can feather the throttle and make the thing shift right, there's probably not anything wrong inside the transmission. So I'm thinking, what's going to do the quickest, easiest thing first? And I saw this reset transmission adaptive tables, and I says, pull over, shut it off, turn on the key, reset the tables, and we drove it again. I said, now make it shift just as hard as you can. I want to see this problem again. And she could never get that thing to shift hard again after that. And she said, I had saved up $1,600 to buy another transmission for this vehicle, and now I'm not going to have to spend that money on that. And so she was really, really happy. Something else that I ran into was my buddy had this 2007 Silverado, and he had a it was flex fuel, and you know, that fuel composition sensor, it will get skewed, and I had seen that actually cause them to start hard cold on some of those GM vehicles by over fueling it because they thought it had more alcohol in the fuel than it did. And his was beginning to get skewed like that. I don't remember if it was a code that it threw or what happened, but I went over to a scan tool, and I noticed on that scan tool that I got, that it's a tablet similar to this one here. I said it gave me the option of recalibrating that fuel composition sensor, and so I recalibrated it, and it went back where it was supposed to, instead of misreporting the amount of alcohol in the fuel. And so sometimes you can go in there and you can reset things instead of replacing parts. And if it fixes it, it's great. If not, you know, you're gonna have issues, you know. But if you reset it first, then you've saved somebody a lot of money and made yourself look like a hero. That's the point, you know. So do the quick and easy thing first, and a lot of the time that's just, you know, doing this thing on the scan tool or whatever.
Switch it off.
Now, you know that's not supposed to do that. When you switch the engine off, it's not supposed to lose pressure that fast. Well, technically, that's going to be the fuel pump, but the fuel pressure regulator can cause this. The fuel pump's usually what it is, but the fuel pressure regulator can cause this if some debris gets trapped underneath the inside part of that fuel. I'm not talking about the busted diaphragm in the regulator. I'm talking about something being trapped under the, you know, like a piece of trash comes from somewhere and gets trapped so that the fuel pressure regulator cannot adequately control the pressure. And I've run into that before. So that's something you may not ever see. Usually, like I say, it'll be the fuel pump if the pressure drops off like this. But if it drops off like this, when you try to start it, when it's hot, it's going to vapor lock, and it's going to have to push all that air out of there before it fires up. Now, my Explorer was doing that before I sold it to my son for his daughter. And I was not going to go to the trouble to replace a fuel pump for that. And what you can do to, you know, as a workaround on this is just switch the key on 3 to 4 times. I didn't put an answer down here, but switch the key on 3 or 4 times and pressure the fuel system up, and it'll usually fire right up. And that's what I did for quite some time. The fuel pump is still producing adequate pressure, but there's a check valve inside the fuel pump that can cause it to lose pressure and let it go back into the tank, like you see right here. And that's what causes a problem like that if it has a fuel pressure regulator. A lot of the times those fuel pressure regulators in the gas tank, part of the pump. So remember that. Refrigerant enters a condenser as a high pressure vapor. You know, so the refrigerant flows in this direction. High pressure vapor turns into a liquid, goes through the orifice, turns into a low pressure liquid, evaporates in the evaporator, and I should have made this light blue up here, goes through the accumulator, picks up a little bit of oil, but you get nothing going into here but low pressure gas, no liquid, because the compressor cannot compress liquid. And this is on your TXV systems. Of course, this is the older type, it's got that tube hooked to that. So it does the same thing except the receiver dryer down here. If you got a TXV, you'll have a receiver dryer. And so this is basically a variable orifice, and this is the fixed orifice. And so as this gets colder, it throttles the refrigerant so that it's designed to keep it from freezing up. Now on this kind right here, you're basically going to have a pressure cycling switch or something like that. But anyway, or some of them will have a thermistor in there that if when the evaporator gets too cold, it'll kill the compressor, module one of the compressors, and sometimes that thing will go bad. Customer had the tires rotated. That's going to be too long between tire rotations. I've run into this, and it's fairly common. If you're somebody who works at a tire shop, you've seen it. If somebody on a front-wheel drive car does not rotate their tires regularly enough, it's going to cause this sawtooth pattern. And I'm talking about going across the tire this way, not the one kind of feather edge pattern you get whenever they're driving with the wrong toe settings. This one here will cause it to do that. That one lady, at the college, she said, "Hey, the tire's rotated and it sounds like a tractor driving down the road now." And I said, "Okay, let's go ahead and rotate them back like they were." And there's really nothing else you can do about that, unless you want to, put it in there and do some shaving work to remove a bunch of the thread and all. But anyway, that's typically what the deal is on that. You got too long between tire rotations. If you're driving a front-wheel drive car, make sure you rotate your tires regularly. Now this is an interesting little thing here. It's tricky, but it's real world. The same fuse on some of these, this changed in 2002, so this is going to be a long time ago. You check the fuses on this one, because if there is no power coming through here going to the regulator, it won't turn the regulator on. The regulator's got to be turned on by voltage coming through that bulb. That's why they see on this little schematic, you see this resistor bypassing that bulb. So if the bulb blows, the resistor will still fire up the regulator. And so if this is short, if this terminal here is shorted to ground, then this light will be on, but there won't be anything wrong with the alternator. You see, so be aware of that too. So that one circuit right there can throw somebody for a loop. But if the fuse is blown, you might notice in this next and see here's your airbag light and your battery light. All right, now watch. Fuse is blown, they both go out. See there? All right, now this right here is how that looks. So that's the only two things that fuse feeds. It feeds on this particular one, and like the late 90s, early up to 2001 Explorers and Rangers. It feeds this both of these bulbs. One of them's airbag, the other is charge indicator. You see that? Let's watch them come back on. See there? And as soon as you put the fuse back in there, put a good fuse in there, you got those. One of the bugs I used to plant on that 98 Ranger trainer vehicle I have was I'd pull that fuse and have them check the charging system. It will not charge unless it sees voltage. Now what I would do, I said if you take your test light and you hook it between power and that terminal right there, then it'll wake that regulator up, and it'll start charging. But you've actually bypassed this circuit and you substituted a different thing. Anyway, I hope we had a good time with this. Let's go ahead and see how we did on this test. I noticed that these ASE practice tests don't get as many views as some of my other videos, but that's okay, because I just figured I'd go ahead and see if I could help some folks pass their ASE test, and I hope these actually help y'all. Some of them talk about older vehicles, but that's okay too, because I have a good time. See you guys next week. Thank you for tuning in.